Hey, we made it
Recorded
back.
June 21st, 2023. Good afternoon, Brody. Good afternoon, Rod. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
You go ahead, Brody. I don't know how I'm doing at the moment.
What a big sigh from Rod. Okay, well we'll start on a high note. Doing quite well. We had like a day and a half of rain, which was extremely needed out here in Alberta. So garden lawn gonna be great. Hopefully we're shutting down some fires up north. Got snow in the mountains, like 20, 30 centimeters. Like it's just a gong show. So that's a good thing. Weather's good. And then otherwise, I finished off a project, boys. Huge success. I got on the WinWire.
Nice.
I got to forward that to my manager. I just talked to my manager before this call. He's like, "Yeah, Brody, you're the best."
With 10 days left.
With 10 days left. Yeah, you got it.
No,
So
9
got
days.
that impact.
June's only 30 days, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I think you're right there. Yeah, and so moving forward into the summer, I've got like two main projects that I'm excited about. I've probably explained the one like 6 times already, but it's going to be extremely cool working to ensure that Canada can interop with the US, DoD, NATO, and Five Eyes. That's basically my gig around Zero Trust. I'm having like a nerd moment every time it happens. I'm like, I can't believe I'm on this project. This is super sick. So I'm happy. And then also we are planning FY24 community stuff related to, I'm on the worldwide security community. We've got cool people coming up. We're going to do some internal presentations. We're going to anything we can to get that community boosted and operating even better moving forward. I'm just stoked. I'm excited. Sun's out. We had rain. Everything's happy at work. Like, I don't know. I don't even know what's wrong. Like, everything's good. I can't even find something that's wrong today. Like, I don't know. My desk is kind of dirty. Like, everything's kind of good over here. So
it is pretty good.
Yeah. How you boys doing? Can't beat that.
Let's see. I'll go next because I think we need to discuss Ed's new acronym here in a minute that he made up this past week. Sun's out, guns out.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, but Noodle beat me to it. Yeah. Hey, I could announce something this week. I could announce something that first ever announcement. This will be the first place that you actually hear this. And so folks can actually kind of get ready for this. Today, I will be signing the contract for a definitive guide to KQL with MS Press.
Woo!
Yeah, we're gonna take this KQL. We're gonna make it official. Here in a little
There you go. Congratulations.
Everybody remember Matt Zorich, who has been on the show talking about he's a co-author plus another individual. So it's 3 of us. That's awesome because I don't have to write like 3 chapters. I can do that with ChatGPT.
Yeah, you could,
Yeah.
Great.
Well,
yeah, great. Yeah, good for you.
I'm super stoked for him, but if the enthusiasm is not just bubbling out of me, it is because it's a secret admiration. I thought you already had like 4 or 5 books out. It just seems like it's normal. Like, okay, Rod's putting out another book.
So I'm not as prolific as Yuri, who was on last week. It was last week, or no, week before. It was week before. Ren was on last week. Sorry, I didn't mean to forget about Ren. Ren's awesome. However, I do have other books. I haven't written a book for a long time. In fact, I was trying to think when my last book that I wrote was. It's probably
2008.
Was it 2008? I don't know. I gave up books because there's very little return for a lot of effort. Right? But this is one of those things that I just couldn't avoid. Just absolutely had to do. Put my stamp, put my name on this KQL thing if I've not already. So
I think the closest I've gotten to doing that when I fancy myself, like that's the thing to do back then, right? Nobody was having a book and having your name and author credits, working with Packet Publisher. It always on your back. When is it done? Sitting here, not right.
Yep.
Too wordy.
I agree.
I mean, Rod's probably used to that with his day job anyway. He's blasting the internet 6 ways from Sunday with all kinds of information.
People leave me alone.
Let me tell you something.
People really don't like me.
I can see that. But just like, just kidding. But Rob is so prolific in his writing, his contact. He is his own large language model. When I point my ChatGPT, I point at Rod Trent, and I pull everything in from Rod Trent's, lifetime archive. Right. And so Yeah,
That's awesome.
The living large language model.
I love that.
So it's a triple L.
Triple L.
L3M. That's a Rod Trent right there, man.
I tell you what, my brain is exploding on generative AI security for AI, AI for security. Yesterday, during the big rain, I was like, I usually like call it a day at one point for work. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go have some separation. I'm gonna do things, but there's nothing to do when it's crappy out. I just got caught up on all this stuff that's been forwarded my way, and my head is just like, oh my goodness, like it's just a lot, and it's super cool.
Yeah, I haven't quite delved into it like I said I was, and then I sort of pushed it off the way you and I. I'm sorry, Rod. Congratulations on the book again.
Oh no, I don't care. No.
Get a signed copy.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Maybe we'll give away a few on the show. I'm sure that'll happen. I'm sure that will happen.
Yeah. So I haven't really dived into it. You have an in, Brody. You're working with someone who's doing this, but I use the excuse like when you and I were doing certifications, I'll push it off to the summer or when we get out of fiscal, something like that. But one of the things that I'm sort of wary is how much of this learning that, I only have a few brain cells, right, that left. And then you have to go back. It's changing so much. So it seems like a lot of this security is still speculative. You're saying what security around artificial intelligence should look like, but it's not really saying what it should do, because how can the security models keep up with something that is changing and is not in itself is not clearly defined? I think last week when we talked with Ren, that we talked in AI in a very abstract way. It's a thing. You have to believe it's there, right? You can see the interface, but how do you secure something that is going to be ultra difficult to regulate? It looks like it's not going to be a nice playground. I don't think there's going to be a lot of get along. You're not going to see collaboration between, GPT, Bard, I forget what Meta is calling theirs. And that's not even considering the still open source small startup companies, right?
Yeah.
And then you look at you look at companies that have huge amounts of digital collateral, and they're already quickly to the game of monetizing it. You're not getting it. And then if you do get it, you got enough money, can you make it exclusive, whereas you don't allow your competitors to get access to it? Right? So securing it, regulating it, it's
well, and there's another piece to that, right? Is what exists today will be 100% completely different next year.
Yeah. So
keeping up and your knowledge on this is going to be even more difficult than it is with anything in Azure right now. It's just, it's gonna be extremely difficult to keep up.
But then
I like your idea though, Edward. Like we get all the AIs into a canteen, kind of like Star Wars, right? And they can all hang out and intermingle.
Well, somebody
shut first.
Somebody sort of suggested that on one of the financial shows I listened to. Do we create some type of Federal Reserve structure? Because the Federal Reserve consists of 12 banks across the United States, right? And you have a chair and all these other things, right? Yeah. And so that you have some common criteria and some rules to play nice by. There are no rules right now.
Yeah.
No rules. But I'm excited about it. Definitely not fearful of it. Love seeing what's going on. Love seeing the hypothetical chatter that's going around, because people are pretending to know something that you don't know.
Yeah, nobody knows. Nobody knows anything. Yeah.
No. That's what's fun about it.
That's what's fun
messy.
about it.
It's messy. Yeah, it's messy. Yeah. What else, gentlemen? Anything else? Any other updates?
Nothing too technical. I'm getting my butt kicked trying to get a new firewall installed in my lab. Once I get that done, then I'm trying to I subscribe to Cribble. So I'm playing out with the free version first. So I'm doing some log ingestion via Cribble, then into Sentinel. And then I'm trying to point a bunch of stuff from my on-premise and cloud environments into Cribble first. And then from Cribble, I'll transform and get into ADX. And then I'm going to try to do some things. I can't get this dumb firewall to do what I wanted to do. And threatening it doesn't work, right? So I think it has something to do with my provider. They keep doing something with the public IP or something, and it won't bind to the WAN interface.
When in doubt, blame your ISP. That's smart.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah, they're problematic anyway. I
Other
do have
than
a
that,
couple Sentinel things to issue a little knowledge about, I guess. Number one, I don't know how many people know this, but the threat intelligence data connector is being deprecated. It'll be we have about 6 months, so people should migrate to the threat intelligence platform solution. Right? You're not going to lose anything, and you don't have to reconfigure everything. Just stop using the old one and enable and install the new solution. So it should be good. The other piece, customers ask about this all the time. Sentinel customers, they look at that overview pane, that the SOC overview pane in Microsoft Sentinel, that entry point, and they're like, well, what's the KQL queries behind that? So I've actually released the KQL queries for the entire overview pane. Check out my blog. There's a link to my GitHub repository. It has all the queries, so you can create your own entry point.
Yeah, how'd you extrapolate that out? Did you go F12, looked at the back? Well, if you do that, that's not going to work because Azure's written on Node.js, right?
What's it? Can't give away the whole sauce.
Okay.
But check out my blog and like my GitHub repo.
Like
subscribe
me.
to my future
Please
videos.
like
And
me.
that'd be great.
Yeah. But
is there a joke I'm missing? Did he put it out there? I just didn't read his blog or something.
I haven't read his blog.
Oh,
nobody reads my blog.
Well, I do. I mean,
I'm just kidding.
I get the emails. I go click once in a while.
I thought you were going to say something else before we get to our guest in here. I thought you were going to say this because I'm talking to Nathan Swift in Discord. Big shout out, Nathan. Hope you're listening. People ask, can they customize that pane? Like, I want to take that incidents, thing and make it front and center. I want to move the configuration operational tiles from this side and make it across the banner. And I'm like, I don't know if you can.
No, you can't. Yeah, that's static. That's something that's been a request for a long time. It may happen eventually, but why? You can either use the Azure portal dashboards, create your own dashboards for everything within Azure, including Sentinel, or just create a workbook as an entry point. It's all URLs, so just create your entry point and go there instead.
The customer gave a reason. He said, I really would like to create where you're going with it. That was a request in Azure proper. Can I modify my dashboard? And you can, landing. The way they wanted to do it is that they wanted a different Sentinel landing page based on your role. And they wanted to map it to your login. So when you logged in, you see this.
You can do that.
So I recommended the workbook scenario, but you're still logging in Sentinel. When you go to the Sentinel page inside that, it's still the same. They would like to be able to drag and drop and say, okay, SOC analyst, tier 1, junior guy, you get this.
Oh, so you can only see these things even if, right, I get it. Okay.
That's fair. Yeah. Or a leader comes in, they need a read-only high-level view. Yeah.
And he had great ideas, and he said, then I would like to be able to see what they're doing across me as a supervisory panel. Like, not necessarily checking up on them, but SOC 1, your whole thing is to look at alerts. SOC 2, you're to look at and make sure the health. SOC 3, you're looking at incidents, and they like to have it that way. So the company's pretty organized, and they have it of a sort with another SIEM with its own premise. And I was like, I don't know if you can modify it. First I had to go figure out what Azure is written in. It's written in like 3 languages, I think.
Yeah, and I get that. Shiny things are distracting, right? Junior analyst, like, man, I wish I could have access to all those playbooks.
Yeah, and clicking around, right, and wasting time. But after that, nothing much. I'm actually looking forward to not working as much and studying like Brody. Brody, what happened to us? We were taking certifications once every couple of months. We were lazy.
You know what? I slacked hard. I completely forgot to take SC100 over the winter. I'm like, oh yeah, shucks. I just did all my renewals for 200, 300, and 400 just now. And then I just don't like writing certs in the summer because I'm outside. So I don't know if I'll write it, I don't know, the summer or the fall. I got to get it done though. I just kind of forgot straight up.
I did.
And then outside of that, I don't know. I keep saying I'm going to do it, but some CCSP or CISM, some vendor neutral ones might be in my future if I can get Microsoft to pay for the cost,
Now our good buddy Frank posted to the Discord channel today about some cert updates. So if anybody is interested in that, he had posted some updates.
Yeah, he did.
Perfect. Yeah, and please check out our Discord. That would be fantabulous.
Shout out to you, Frank Grimberg. Come on the show.
Love you, Frank. Come on back.
We love you, man.
Love to have you.
And but hey, we have a guest that's sitting in the green room, and we got to get him out of there. He's eating up all the snacks and drinking up all our beer.
Well,
and he's moving furniture around. You know,
not the furniture.
Yeah.
Well, the door was sealed so well. I think some of the oxygen was leaving.
There you go. So, without further ado, I do believe that this guest of the show is a friend of Brody Cassell. Brody.
Sure. It's Castle, but that's cool. So Peter, I'll let him do his own introduction in a sec, also spoke at B-Sides Calgary last year. That's coming up again, Peter. I don't know if you're going to speak again at it or not. I know you kind of came in and you were in the area, and that's why you made it work last time. But and I just thought he was hilarious. Peter's hilarious. He was a great speaker. He talked about all kinds of fun stuff. He dropped some Microsoft stuff, and I've been reaching out to him like, come on the show. And so here we are. Peter, introduce yourself, talk about what you do, and we'll go from there, bud.
Thank you, Brody. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to be in Calgary. I'd love to be there. It was a little overwhelming for B-Sides. There was a lot of people there, and a lot of B-Sides I go to are really small. So it was a really cool event. So yeah. So Peter Morin, been in the industry for a little over 25 years now. Worked for a consulting firm managing the team Canada-wide. A lot of the work I do is on the incident response side of things, and really focusing on operational technology, so in the ICS world. So that keeps me busy. I'm not an engineer by trade, so I rely on a lot of the engineers we do have in our staff, but yeah, a lot of fun doing that. So yeah.
Cool. Good times. And what's obviously you can't reveal specific customers, but like, what are you seeing in that landscape right now that's keeping you so busy? What do you think would be informative for our viewers out there who are maybe more in the IT realm and they don't touch OT too much or ICS?
I mean, it's a lot of the things that you typically think that are kind of getting better are still not really getting better. I mean, there's still a lot of infighting between IT and OT. With that I was hoping that would go away over time, but it's still there. So, trying to bridge the gap and bring those two teams together a little bit more. The OT people, the engineers know their thing. They know their environments, whether it's manufacturing or power company, but the IT people obviously they understand the IT side of things and the cyber threats that come along with it. So trying to fill the divide in a little bit better is something that we do a lot of strategy work around, and then just a lot of the things that you would just in the IT world you would cringe because we've solved a lot of this. The pandemic didn't really help things. Over the pandemic we had a lot of I'm not going to roll a truck to that power company anymore because we're in isolation. So, you get a vendor would be like, take this black box and plug it into your network and it'll be okay. Just don't tell anybody it's there and give us full internet access.
Oh boy.
And then
grid.
They would say, well, they're a big vendor. Like, we trust them. So we'll just plug that box in.
Like SolarWinds. Yeah.
Sometimes even worse. And then today, we start looking at those networks. Typically, we do a lot of passive monitoring or passive discovery of those networks, and then we start to see like this weird box that doesn't fit. Like you're looking at the network and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, Windows 10 laptop. Okay, that's an engineer. I know that host name makes sense. And then, okay, there's a server here that looks like some kind of engineering server. Okay. And then there's like this box and it's like, it doesn't have an operating system that you would recognize. And the vendor's not recognizable. And it's in some part of the network that it's on its own. And then you start asking the question, like, what is that box? And like, oh, yeah. That's ABC company told us to plug that on there so they can get into the network whenever they want. And I said, do you control any of that? And they're like, no. They just come in whenever they need to get on the network and they do their thing. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, not the best. I got a buddy, Jacques, and he's telling often organizations are finding like land turtles and other various nefarious devices within their physical IT realm. I hope that's not happening on our grid or in our close to critical infrastructure, but that's scary when you've got a backdoor into what is generally a very secure environment. I've only got limited experience working with critical infrastructure, but it was a great part of my career. And the layers between this power generation company, from IT to OT, and the hops, and like the more seriousness that you have to go through these bastion levels to get to the grid, for example, it's intense. Like, it's intense. So for someone to have a backdoor into that's scary, man. That's scary to think about.
Yeah, I mean the biggest issue is when you talk about, for example, power companies, is there's legislation to protect or to dictate how power companies are going to run, but that only applies to large power companies. So if we talk about things like NERC-CIP, which is the mainstay we use for legislation and audits and so on and so forth, but that only applies to power companies that are putting a bulk amount of power into the grid. So for example, if you have a small distribution company that's distributing power to, say, a small town in northern Alberta, they're not going to be covered under NERC-CIP. So it's kind of the Wild West for them, right?
Oh, okay.
There's some standards out there. NIST does have standards, for example, to help organizations out. But in a lot of cases, these organizations just don't have the staff. They don't have the people. It's the same thing where we see in IT, right? I can hire Sally or Joe to do cyber, but when there's nothing really going on, they can't justify the cost. So they say, okay, well, you're going to do IT and you're going to do cyber. So, and then on the OT world, they're so worried about, well, I don't want someone poking at a device that's not supposed to be poked at, like an IT device, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
you were mentioning regulation specs and everything, and the only one that I recognized was NIST. Are these specific to Canada, or are these the energy industry? These apply to them, right?
Yeah. So when you're looking at NIST from a framework perspective, very similar to if you refer to like CSF, the cybersecurity framework, there's a NIST standard, a special publication 800-82. 800-82 can be overlaid on top of CSF, for example, to give it more of an OT flair. But obviously that's guidance, right? Now, when it comes to legislation, like actually meeting a standard or you get fined, NERC-CIP is what we see in North America. So it applies to the US and Canada. And then there's a countries, for example, in Europe, they do have a lot of, European flavors of that. But again, it doesn't apply to everybody. It only applies to larger bulk generators and bulk distributors of power, right? So, and again, you could say, well, it doesn't apply to that company that has 100,000 customers, but I'm sure one of those 100,000 customers is one of those power any more than the person that, is, part of a 10 million subscriber company out in a larger city, right?
Right.
Are you acting as the arbitrator and remediator or mediator between IT and OT? Because you're making a very distinct difference between both of them, right? Because working in cyber, I find myself always bumping head with IT, but I don't work in manufacturing, energy, distribution, and things and such. So not so much OT. So are you in the middle right there?
In many cases, yeah. I mean, I've sat and I've been in boardrooms where the IT people are on one side and the OT people are on the other side, literally. So
pitchforks.
And don't get me wrong. I don't want to disparage the power companies or any of these organizations. They all want to solve the problem. I've worked with so many, whether it is power companies, water, or even things like manufacturing, transportation. They all understand and they're aware of what's going on. I mean, you see it every day. Somebody's getting breached, and even if it's not a power companies know, hey, we're probably going to be next. So it just they're again stuck with not understanding. I mean, we see common things like, for example, having an Active Directory server that's in the IT space being shared by the OT people, which is typically a no-no. You typically don't want to have you want to have separate Active Directories for each environment. And in times we'll see that, and then we'll see a trust set up between the two. So it's okay. Well, what's the point of that, right? So, they're going the next level to say, well, look, we don't want to have local authentication to these, for example, these HMIs or these monitoring systems, or we don't want to have local authentication to this equipment because it's usually no password, or it's always logged in, or it's a common user. So they'll go the next route and say, oh, I put in an Active Directory server, but then it's not an Active Directory server dedicated to OT. So, you can see that they're trying. There's a lot of emphasis. I mean, all these companies that came out of the woodwork over the past 5 years, whether it's, Clarity or Dragos or Nozomi or any of these companies, I mean, you go back 6 years ago, they really didn't exist, or they were a thought that somebody had in a VC office at the time. So you can see this has become a big thing. Those companies sat back, they looked at the OT protocols that are running over the OT networks, very similar to TCP or UDP. They reverse engineered them. They figured out what they were doing, and they figured out how to monitor them. And then products arose out of that, right? So it is, we're moving in the right direction. It just, we need to be hopefully moving a little quicker, right?
My understanding is these. Sorry, one second. My understanding is these sensors, these appliances, etc. They can be decades old, right? Running, potentially with no updates from major manufacturers, and so it's just a completely different world, right? The Purdue model, I'm not an expert. I've looked into it a couple of times, but it really is just a completely interesting differential space that OT versus IT.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, whether it's a field device, whether it's for example, in the power world, you've probably heard of what a PLC is. In the power world, we use what we call RTUs. So an RTU is like a job specific PLC. So an RTU is typically not programmed like a PLC. It's pre-programmed to do a job already. So you could buy an RTU, for example, to monitor the flow of oil on a pipeline. So these RTUs, for example, when they're in an austere environment, or they're out there in a pipeline or in a substation somewhere, they do their job. And the vendors are releasing CVEs about this stuff. They're saying, hey, you know what? If you send a malformed packet, you can bypass authentication. So there are CVEs coming out regularly for this equipment. But again, how am I gonna take that out of production, right?
Like, well, one of the challenges with that is oftentimes, they are secure by inaccessibility, right? They're in these remote places. They don't have internet connectivity. And the only time they're touched is when you get a failure or a tolerance alert. And so someone goes out and replaces the unit, right? The problem seems to be that once these units either have remote access, introduced to them, or they have public internet access, then the CVEs can be, leveraged against them. But, they out of sight, out of mind, right? Nobody touches them. If it's not broke, don't touch it, right? And when you go out there, most of the time it is troubleshooting, can't solve it in 5 minutes, replace the unit, put a tag out and put it in. But let me ask you a question, sort of related to what you just said. You're looking at, as Brody said, you're looking at outdated equipment, dated decades, right? No updates and everything hasn't failed. Most of the stuff is solid state anyway, right? There's no moving parts. Not to be uncharitable and sparing to the people. What about the people? Because this type of industries tend to have very long-lived people enroll, right? They go to a power place and they work there 30 years, right? They started at help desk, now they're the information officer or director of security. Is that harder, trying to get that mindset to change, to say you have to modernize in the way you go about your business and the technology you use, even though nothing's broken? How hard is that? Because when I talk to some people working in that industry, they like, oh yeah, I've been doing this for 25 years. What is that like, Peter?
I mean, it depends. I mean, my experience so far, and again, there is that convergence issue, as I mentioned earlier, the IT/OT convergence, people on both sides of the table. Typically when I meet a lot of the senior engineers, they're pretty good about things. So what's happening right now in a lot of cases is, and again, I'll refer to power companies, they're going through this revolution, this digitization revolution, where we're getting, for example, in a substation. And I don't want to get too far down the engineering rabbit hole. And again, I'm not an engineer, so and I don't even play one on TV. So
you're good.
So in a substation, for example, they have these devices called protective relays, and a relay essentially is monitoring the quality of the power and what's going on in the substation. And in the event something is out of a bound, it can flip a breaker automatically, so it can shut the power. And that avoids things like, explosions and fire and all those bad things that we want to happen. Now, old protective relays are based on electromechanical technology. So it's old coils and all kinds of, again, engineering stuff that I'm not an expert in. And those things are typically not really monitored, or they're monitored over like a low bandwidth radio connection. Now, as we get into digitization and we want to do things like really understand, for example, what's happening on the grid, be more modern, all these good things. They're modernizing these, and they're putting in, basically, they refer to them as IEDs, or intelligent electronic devices. And these IEDs are basically like a modern version of that electromechanical device. They're digital now. It's a computer with a CPU and RAM and all that good stuff. Now, with that comes all of this telemetry you can suck down from it. The problem is, on a radio connection, low speed radio connection, you don't really have that kind of bandwidth to do that. So what they start doing is they start putting fiber into substations. They're putting in cell connections, and so on and so forth. And then that opens up the network to high speed bandwidth attacks, right? So going back to your question, Edward, what's happening in a lot of cases that a lot of the engineers are going down this road of digitization already, and they understand that what comes with that are the increased threats against their environments.
So yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but so these OT folks, are they starting to at least maybe?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
From a security perspective, are they doing the updates? Are they doing the security patches? Are they, securing the network? Because that seems to me, just what Ed was talking about, these people that have been in this role for 30 years, that seems to me to kind of be teaching old dog new tricks type situation, right?
Well, and again, when you're going from something that's a legacy to something new, there is a change as to how you do things. I'll give you an example. We're working right now with a number of companies in the manufacturing space, and they're deploying things like Dragos and Nozomi and those type of passive monitoring products. And automatically, who do you think owns those products in the enterprise? IT.
The security team?
I would say IT. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the OT people are like, okay, the IT people want to come in and put this stuff in our environment that they don't know. We understand how we're building widgets in the manufacturing space. And the IT people are like, oh, the OT people don't know anything about this, so we're not going to even include them. We're just going to put this stuff in there. And so when you talk to people like, Rob Lee and all these guys in the space, they'll tell you, like, this was meant to facilitate security for both sides of the fence. It was meant to provide visibility to the OT people. It was meant to be a tool for them as well, but it's being brought in by IT because IT are the cyber people. So you end up having this like one-sided tool that's really serving IT, and IT don't really understand how OT works. So they don't really, they don't know, for example, that when they see a certain Modbus transaction over the network, that's potentially a bad thing, unless they have a use case already built within the tool or being driven through their SIM, where they can actually say, "Uh-oh, bad Modbus. This is bad. We have to look into it."
Yeah.
So that disparity and that problem between IT and OT is very much there.
So what happened to the change management process?
It's there. It's there. It's there. It's definitely there. And it's a little bit more, it's a little tighter in the OT space as well. So, that also becomes a problem. Like, I want to go do, we was working with another large manufacturer, and the only time of the year they have a fairly big plant, and the only time of the year they have downtime is on Christmas Day. So they do they literally have a plant shutdown, and there's like people like with brushes scrubbing things.
Yeah,
you know,
and
what
it's
I mean?
like an army getting paid triple OT to get it done. Yeah,
and they joke about it because they call it we're wrapping the presents, because that's the only day you're. And then we say, okay, all that stuff you have to do to make everything work properly and make sure that there's no slowdown and management's happy with everything that's going out. On top of that, you're going to have to upgrade all of that equipment with all the CVs that have basically came out during the course of the year. And you only have a day to do it, and you've got to test it too, and you've got to back out if it doesn't work. So like, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we just make it so inaccessible that we don't have to ever do anything to it?
Oh, okay.
Until that thing goes down. And then I remember early in my career going to a paper mill, and you know how paper mills, right? And they had some device up in some crow's nest somewhere, and I had to walk across it. It was like a gangplank up like 30 feet in the air to go, help fix this device. So,
I did one years ago when I first started getting into OT, and it was a metals plant in the US. And basically what they did was they were taking a large gauge of metal and they were making it a smaller gauge of metal. So it involved heating the metal up, unrolling it, stretching it, and then rolling it back up. And what they would bring these big coils of metal or big rolls of metal in from one side on a truck into the plant. There was a crane. There would be these big cranes, giant cranes that would go right across the plant. And there was, very much like you said, there was a crow's nest up there. And I got to go visit up in this crow's nest, and it was like a vac system from like, like from 1979. And it was like, there was its own air conditioning system around it and everything. And it was, like I said, it's still a digital printed on it. It was ancient, right? And that ran those cranes, and they said something like, if the crane fails, it's like $2 million an hour, because all the product gets backed up and it doesn't get on the truck on the other side.
It's compounding in industries like that, right? That it's, I think, a major retail store that sells hardware and home improvement stuff said that for every hour that their e-commerce site is unable to take orders, they will lose in something like $1 million a minute, right? And then you think they're exaggerating until you see what their annual retail is like. Yeah, that's all it is, the number, right? When you do it, but I have to side with these industries because it is of necessity. When you think about it, think how simplistic our space program is. It seems like it's highly technical and everything, but remember, you wanted something that was highly available, very operational, and had a very low failure point, right? And simplicity is the way you get to that, right? So the more complexity and the more stuff you put into it, the greater chances that you have X variables for it to fail. And then you may not have access to it, right? That's a big thing, being able to get to that site. But with all the things that you've talked about, Peter, people always say, what's your biggest challenge working with this here? But I'm going to ask you this. If you could do one thing that could solve a lot of the problems that are pretty universal across all your customers, you get one wish, and then you just say it to your customer and they'll do it, right? Without anything. They're like, yeah, Peter, you're right. What's the one thing you could do?
Ed. Sorry, I called you Genie. Ed the Genie.
Yeah.
One wish.
So you get one wish, and I'll go ahead and I'll do it. What is it?
That's a tall order. Wow. I would probably say, and again, I'm not, this is going to sound so marketing because of all these products that are out there. And I'm not saying that all these products do 100% of what they should do properly or whatever the case is. But I think investing more in what's actually happening on the network at any given time. And I think that would alleviate, like, and don't get me wrong, I do walk out of clients and say, do not touch that box. Don't upgrade it. I know everybody's going to start posting things. This guy's crazy. He's not a cyber guy. It does happen. I mean, we see systems that are running Windows 7, or it's not Windows 7, Windows XP, or even Windows 7, right? And they can't get rid of it. It's just impossible. So in my mind, if we can fully monitor what's going on and have some kind of response to something that potentially is happening, that at least gets us to the point. And when I say monitoring, I mean a human looking at it, not just some AI driven, something's happening, so let's do something. If you can have a human that's actually monitoring what's going on in these environments and have some kind of response, then I think at least things are not, I mean, look at dwell times, they're not down to below 100 yet. If we can reduce that and we could say, like, look, I caught it really quickly. Same thing with like ransomware, for example. Like if you get ransomware on a computer, it's a bad day. If you get ransomware that spreads to your enterprise of 5,000 computers, it's the end of day for you. So, I think if we could reduce that, we could reduce the risk of something going on by having monitoring. That would be something I would be really happy to see.
I like that. How do you and I don't know either, I'm ignorant. Do you monitor OT environments the same way as an IT environment with a SIM or monitoring platform? What does the difference look like from an incident response standpoint between the two environments? I know you've got experience in both.
Yeah, so typically it's as I mentioned, it is passive. And now there's a debate as to whether or not you can actively query or try to discover a device on an OT device, whether it's going to fall over or not. Nobody wants to take that chance, so we do things passively. So either we basically set up a number of sensors that listen to raw traffic over the network, either via span or using a tap on the network, and basically watch traffic go by. And you typically set up one of these systems in a baselining mode over a little bit of time, and it will build out what your network looks like. Essentially, it'll say, okay, well, I know these systems are here. They have these IP addresses. I'm going to bubble them together. I know these are here. I'm going to bubble these together. And then I'm going to watch traffic patterns over a little bit of time. And then that becomes your baseline. And then after that, you just basically monitor and you look for outliers. So you could say, well, look, Edward has a laptop here. He's a technician. He goes to the substation every Wednesday, and we could see his machine pops up on the network every Wednesday. And then you could say, well, hang on, there's another machine that's popped up on Friday, and it's not something that we typically see. It's not the same laptop that Edward uses. It's also trying to do things like update the field device, which we never really do. So we look for outliers. And then you can take all that data and you can backhaul it into a SIM. So whether it's Sentinel or Splunk or whatever, and then start to correlate with other pieces of data you have. So for example, if you have, you mentioned the Purdue model, if you have a DMZ between your OT and your IT network, you might want to collect the firewall logs from that. Or if you have a Citrix box or jump box, you collect the logs from that, and then you can start to see, well, look, somebody accessed this device and it's sourced out of the firewall on the IT side. So you can actually build exactly what the path was to getting to that device. From an incident response perspective, that is key. Being able to retrace and have an actual understanding of where assets are, instead of like, oh, there's this box with this IP address somewhere in one of the 852 substations we have. Where it is, nobody knows. So that asset management is a big piece of it.
Is it money? Because I come from old school. Me and Rod's been doing this a while. I don't know how long you've been in the industry, but this doesn't sound like a technology issue. This sounds like a reluctance to invest, because you said something that passive scanning and passive information retrieval is frowned upon because it may cause that particular OT device, like you said, I haven't heard the word fall over in a while, right? That's the industry. It fell over. You made it try to answer a question it couldn't, and he put his hand on his head and it fell, right? But I'm thinking duplicity. I mean, what is wrong with having redundancy where you have a passive and an active scanning device? I mean, all you do is just dual head device, and to keep it separate. This is how we used to do back in the day. You had redundancy, right? We had redundant PRIs, redundant switches, failovers. I cannot imagine with the advancement in IoT and OT that if it's something as simple as this, you put one on this side of the pipeline and you only do, passive, and you put something with similar capabilities on the other side, and you're actively scanning it, right? And you can still pull the same telemetry. What is the thing that's making this so hard?
Has to be cost. Has to be price, right?
It's cost. It's cost. It's a bit of complexity, and it's also like, it's trying to convince somebody why they should do that when it's never been a problem before.
Yeah.
So that's why passive monitoring has become so popular. It's because I can actually convince somebody to be able to monitor their network without ever touching it. So with passive monitoring, I never have to interrogate a box. I never have to touch it. And that way I can give them pretty good assurances that it's not going to be a problem, right?
Yeah, I get it. You're a consultant, I'm a consultant, Bro's a consultant, Rod's consulting or have been. And the old thing was, well, it was working till you put your hands in it.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with me, right?
And like I said, a lot of this stuff, if you look at some of the attacks that have happened in the past, the attacks on the Ukraine, the numerous attacks that happened in Ukraine, the black energy or those attacks. I mean, they took advantage of protocol manipulation, for example. So, in a lot of cases where a lot of power companies, for example, would say, well, the environment's really way too complex. There's no malware that can actually do anything. It doesn't exist. People wouldn't understand it. It's out of the realm of what a typical attacker would look for. But when we looked at those attacks, for example, they did some interesting things. Like, for example, there was a CVE that came out for, remember one of these protective relays I was talking about? There was a CVE that came out that would allow you to DOS that protective relay. So if I went and started screwing with a breaker, and that protective relay is supposed to jump in and say, hey, that breaker's not supposed to turn off, but I DOS the protective relay, I can now flip the breaker and there's nothing to stop me from doing it. So we saw like very complicated attacks that took advantage specifically of OT issues, and not necessarily just, well, I know this DOS is going to work in an IT environment. I'll just roll the dice and make it work in OT. These were specific flaws in those environments, in those OT environments. And for example, the second attack against the Ukraine, there was 300,000 plus people out of power for a couple hours in December.
Christmas.
I mean, how mean do that in the coldest time of the year? So nation states, they can get this equipment. It's like, that's the other thing. Like, being able to find a box by a company like GE or SCL or any of these device manufacturers that build substation equipment. I mean, you could buy this stuff. It's not illegal to buy it, and a lot of times you can find it used, put it in the lab, and start to pick away at it, and eventually you'll find something, right?
And you made a great point. I think we said it last show. You are highly delusional if you believe that the bad guys are not going out and getting themselves an AWS subscription or GCP or an Azure and buying the stuff, right? You go to eBay, you can buy it and beat up on it. I got, raspberries over there, fillets, OIT stuff. All you do is start beating on it, right? And you'll see.
I can go into our lab, Edward, in our OT lab here at work, and we have PLCs and RTUs and all that stuff. And clients will take us up on the offer of, hey, we want to play with something not on our gear. Can we use yours? Sure. Here's remote access. You can play on our gear. So the stuff is, you can go to any electronics, or I should say, power utility distribution company. The companies that sell the huge spindles of coiled of cable. You can go and buy any of this stuff if you want it. As long as you have the dollars to spend, you can buy any of this. Yeah. It's not like you're buying, DoD stuff. It's readily available to anybody that wants to pay the money for it.
It's public. And I guess in the situation of Ukraine, I mean, the old Soviet Union built the infrastructure there, so they know where the vulnerabilities were. And I hear they actually brought, the news told me, engineers who knew where the main the crown jewels, let's say, for missile strikes. They knew exactly where they were because they had the old blueprints of these power generation stations, of these critical infrastructure locations. And if they built it, they know the vulnerabilities, unfortunately. And so, like, that's it's eye-opening and very mean that they pulled that.
Yeah, there's no civility. I mean, war used to be war is bad, period. But war used to be something that was honorable, right? There were rules of engagement. In Geneva, you just didn't do these things. Everything seems to be
different type of war. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you got ransomware organizations and people who justify their actions by saying, if you had done what you were supposed to do, I wouldn't be able to get in. So this is really your fault, right?
Yeah.
But when you we are the Microsoft Security Insights show, pod show, whatever.
Experience.
So let's pivot here. Of the Microsoft products, you happen to have probably heard of, Microsoft Defender for IoT, right?
Yes.
Inside of Microsoft, are you seeing an adoption of this technology? And if you are, is it being highly effective where it's changing the mind of some of these places to say, yeah, you're right. We need to really adapt to the way we're going about our business, because while those sensors are out there in their legacy and they're older than most of us on the show right here, they are being replaced, right? I had an interesting conversation with someone from a major manufacturer, and they said, we are more vulnerable than you know. Even if they do something, we have the burden of proof to say that they didn't change anything. And I said, elaborate. You get inside of our manufacturing and you change something. So when I get a spot weld to the frame that's supposed to last 3 seconds and you make the spot weld last 1 second, I got to recall that car. Because now that's a major manufacturer deficiency for that, right? So what Microsoft Defender for IoT and some of the other IoT, are these tools effective, or are they only effective if you modernize your environment to take advantage of them?
I think it's both. I think they're absolutely useful, and they're doing the right things. I think the other thing also is there is a lot of. I think one thing that Microsoft's done a really good job in is really bring a lot of trust in the quality of their cloud products, to the point where a lot of organizations that were a little scared of moving to the cloud are starting to do that more. So we are seeing a lot more organizations that are very traditional, like we're going to have an on-prem data center. They're starting to build cloud plans. And I think that's only possible because of the investments that companies like Microsoft have made into building a cloud that people can rely upon from a security perspective. And I mean, there is the shared responsibility model, but that goes out the door if there isn't any tools. There aren't any tools to allow a person to best secure their environment. Like I was just setting up an Azure environment the other day, and setting up some application security groups and so on. And the amount of integrated other products that Microsoft has partnered with, that, for example, where people say, well, I'm a Fortinet company or I'm an X company or whatever. Well, I can get the best of both worlds and have a really secure environment. I think a lot of what we've seen over the past couple of years in cloud, I think, is one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of companies in the space start to really adopt, so they can get rid of the old on-prem solutions.
Nice.
Well, with that type of environment, though,
be difficult.
Yeah, I'm about to say your hands are tied, right? Because they're not making cars in the cloud.
Well, there are some SCADA tools now that are cloud based. So there are control systems that are cloud based. The only negative we see is that, for example, having a NERC SIP compliant environment usually will have to be on prem.
Yeah,
they have a lot of rules around that. But outside of that, I'm seeing, for example, manufacturers that are starting to put a lot more into the cloud. And a lot of their SCADA type systems are actually cloud based. So there's a lot going on. I mean, there's or whether it's a data lake or a historian that sits in the cloud. There's a lot more adoption of the cloud right now, which is getting better, obviously.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I don't think it's not anytime soon, be 100%, but yeah, that's awesome. That's good to hear.
Yeah. Peter, let's give you the classic podcast question, because I know you've got a lot of IT experience as well.
Sure.
So if you had to choose between 4 Microsoft Defender products that your customers should deploy first, would it be Defender for Office, Defender for Identity, Defender for Endpoint, or Defender for Cloud Apps?
Defender for Endpoint.
Love it.
Defender for Endpoint, and that I was just having this conversation with somebody, and again, be totally transparent. I've had this conversation. People saying, "Oh, when Defender first came out, it was like it's there, it's available. The base Defender, and when you look at where that product has gone over the past couple of years, I mean, it is a big contender product compared to a lot of people in the space. It's up in the top of the Gartner quadrant, and I always tell people, like, look, if you don't want to have a totally separate stack of products, and you're you're a Microsoft shop, why would you go and get a third party product in there? So I think Defender for Endpoint, I'm very impressed with that product. We do a lot of trials of, our pen test team does a lot of poking at these products unofficially. I'm not gonna.
Oh, that's good.
Say anything. And it does come out on top quite a bit. So that's probably what I would go with.
Yeah, and I know it's difficult in air-gapped environments, or it was, and there's been changes coming down the pipeline from product team because they understand that friendly competing solutions out there might operate better in air-gapped restricted environments. Do you see that? Do you see EDRs like MDE more in the OT space on those Windows boxes, those servers that are managing that environment?
Products that can do proper whitelisting are typically products that are going to do very well in this space. Because a company that will say, well, I want to deploy an EDR product, I can get it to run on my HMI or on my engineering server, but I'm never going to be able to get updates for it, or I'm going to have to sneaker net updates to it. The ones that will operate with a really, really good whitelisting are typically products that will survive long. I mean, I've gone in there and I've seen products like that companies aren't even making anymore, but they do the job and they're whitelisting properly. And if you look at malware, I mean, all that malware is a program that needs to execute. So at the end of the day, if you have 5 things that you're running on that Windows machine and you can whitelist those 5 things and everything else is bogus, then it does the job most of the time. So whitelisting is always a big one in this environments.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's no magic bullet or Edward the genie that's going to solve it, right? Because it ultimately comes down to people and processes, risk acceptance, and all this other stuff. You could take yourself to death, but if nobody's going to sit here and really take the pain, I think sometimes companies think that cybersecurity is supposed to be painless. It will never be painless. There will be some pain, right? And but you have to make a decision, right? Do I endure the short-term inconvenience, maybe some revenue reduction to be able to get ourselves in a place to show due diligence? Or do I say, it won't happen to me, or I deal with it, right? And one of the topics that we're going to have later on the show, if Rod ever gets off his hump, is we're going to talk about cybersecurity insurance, right? I think, Rod,
we do have, we have someone scheduled next month, I believe. Yeah. Cybersecurity.
And how does sort of lull people into if something happens, I'm covered. No, you're not. Right. And so we'll talk about that. But you know what? I'm not going to fault you on that, Peter. If you chose MDE, I get it. You're an endpoint, you're a touchy guy, you're a hardware guy.
He's doing it for his customers.
I'm old school. I'm old school too.
Yeah, I'm old school.
I look for something good, strong on the endpoint, and try to protect that, right?
And Microsoft has made tremendous strides in the last 10 years around that particular product, because until they decided to become a security company, they did outsource it essentially. You had Solari, you had ESOP, Symantec, and everything. They let someone else handle that, right? And then when they introduced Defender as an antivirus, they became a running joke at IT conventions, right? And now they're a contender. Because when governments start adopting your product, they start using it, somebody's listening now.
Well, I hear that a lot. People say Microsoft did it. Microsoft did it. Well, no, our customers did it. We're just meeting literally our customers' feedback and their requirements, and that's what has vaulted us to leadership, is because we really care about what our customers need.
Yep. If you listen to the customers, they'll tell you. You got to listen, right? Good or bad. It's a hugely interesting thing that you do. One of the persons I used to work alongside with in the industry, energy industry, say that fast 3 times. He went back to be a CISO at an industry place. His name was Mark Gable, and he was sort of a big wig in the thing. And he used to tell me stories about what you're telling me, and it's right on point, right? At power stations and sub places and stuff like that. It sounds like it's daunting. How do you wake up in the morning and it's like, let me get at what gets you out of the bed?
And are we getting better? Building on Edward's question, are we getting better in North America in this space for protecting critical infrastructure?
Absolutely. I think we're the direction's there. We're heading down that right direction. There's a lot of work to be done. I love it. I mean, I remember I first started back in the late 90s. Yes, I'm getting old, like everybody else. And I started as a software developer, and then I was like, configuring Cisco routers and all that stuff. And then when I finally got into cyber in around mid 2000s full time, I was like, I'm never going back to any of the other stuff because this is amazing. And OT for me has kind of been that cyber that I fell in love with back in the mid 2000s. It's much like people that fall in love with like cloud security. It's another big thing for them to say, I'm not going to get bored. I mean, as cyber people, that's one of the big issues we have to contend with, is that it's going to get boring and we have to, our brains need to be focused on something else. So OT's been great. I really enjoy it. The really fun thing about OT is the scale of what you're looking at. Everything is big. It's, if you've ever been to a hydroelectric plant, or you've ever been to a nuclear plant, or you've ever been to a place where they're manufacturing sneakers, everything is at a huge, large scale. It's so incredibly amazing. And the people that run the stuff are so incredibly smart. It's, like I said, I'm not an engineer, and being around these folks all the time, it kind of renews my sense of excitement and energy for the profession. So I find it really, really a lot of fun from that perspective.
Yeah, any industry that's in the manufacture or creation business is, especially on large scale, is amazing. I was in the Navy. I watched them build a submarine. I like, this thing will never. It is going to sink, whether you want it or not. Right? It's going to go down. And to see these folks come in, it is amazing. To like, you go from a hole to pulling wires to doing this to sensors here, and like, how's this going to work? But I've been in power plants. I've been in sneaker manufacturing place. That's odd. The smell is the thing that'll get you if you've ever been to one. Man, but that's cool. Well, I don't have any other questions. Peter, this is good to hear from someone who's not in the atypical, industry that some of the people that we interview, and you're definitely working with something. I was living around the corner from Colonial Pipeline when it happened, right? And that was so now you can tell why I live in the U.S., but that was crazy what was going on there, right? And I think it did open eyes. I think the last major security events over the last 2 years has opened like world eyes, especially SolarWinds, and these ransomware attacks that are getting sophisticated. These groups are coming. But one thing, you said something that, the pandemic didn't help. There's always a silver lining. It sort of helped. I got smarter because I wasn't distracted. I was stuck here, and all Brody was saying, all we did was read, study, lab, read, study, lab, rinse and repeat. So something good did come out. I got more certifications renewed or achieved during the pandemic than I had in a short time. That I had I did a lot.
Yeah.
Now I'm dumber than a bag of rocks.
No.
I've turned into a salesperson.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure, Peter, you're still upskilling all the time, right? Like, doesn't get old.
I try. And like I said, in this space, it's not as much certifications as much as it's somebody that will say, okay, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to explain to you how we go through the process of creating a certain product, or we'll do a plant walkthrough and we'll see how they're making something, or they'll tell me like. We have a natural gas terminal. I'm going to show you how we take the gas and we liquefy it. Like, there are things that happen all the time. We just don't realize how they do it. And for me to understand where there could be a cyber issue, you have to sit back and really understand what they're doing. So I learn a lot of things that I would never have the opportunity to learn unless I was an engineer or working in that space. So it's really interesting. I mean, like you said, day to day, and the networks are all kind of very bizarre looking at first. So it's a lot of fun. It's a really, really lot of fun.
Well, it sounds like our backgrounds are similar. You sound like you were a route switch guy, data center guy before you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, me too. So let's see who goes back furthest. First network, LAN operating network that you deployed.
I did a token ring to Ethernet conversion.
I was there.
I read about those.
Token ring.
So I cut my teeth on Lantastic and Artisoft.
Lantastic. Oh, you had to say it. Oh my
Great.
God. I love I was
right?
a Lantastic guru, boy. I tell you what.
I learned DR DOS before I learned MS DOS.
I'll throw my age in the Microsoft hat. I first started working with Windows when it was NT 351. And I was making I was discussing this with a friend the other day, where today, if you have an issue with like 2016, you can go on Google and somebody's figured out. There's an MVP somewhere that's figured it out, right? Back then, I remember we were trying to get back then it was just RAS, remote access services.
Yeah.
We're trying to get RAS working with a specific kind of modem. I think it was a Digiboard at the time, and it wasn't working. And I remember calling Microsoft support, and the support guy telling me, if you figure it out, call us back. We'd like to figure out, put it in our documentation. Back then, it was like everything was new. Nobody had figured anything out yet.
Yeah.
Go check the BBS for the answer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not working. Have you checked the dip switches on your modem?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I have. I know. It's so funny. Oh man.
That's
or
awesome.
they're like, oh, it's gonna, the next release will come out in about 6 months. We have to build a driver for that.
Yeah, we got to build a driver.
So it's like, okay, I guess can't use that modem for 6 months till the driver hopefully comes out. So.
And we were fine with it. Fine with it.
Yeah. Well, that's been very interesting. I now don't feel like the oldest old man in the industry. I'm hanging in there. AI might breathe a few more years until my work life, right? But yeah, man, those bring back memories. Back then, we figured it out. You figured it out, right? Because everybody's coming to work 8 o'clock the next morning. You don't have the luxury. You figure it out. And so, and that's the advantage that we have over these upstart new folks coming in. Yeah, we got the war wounds to prove it. Well, sir, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Peter.
That
was fun.
Brody, thanks for bringing such an excellent guest. And maybe one day you want to come back and guest host, right?
Anytime. I'm a big fan of your show. It's like I said, I think you guys gel very well together, and it makes for a very interesting time. And it's my pleasure. I'm very thankful you guys had me on the show.
Yeah, if you're ever in the States, man, down in the Georgia area, look me up.
I probably will be eventually.
He won't respond back, but
that's not true.
He says that's all he got. But seriously, Peter, thanks, bud. Yeah, it was great meeting you. Besides, it was an entertaining conversation. I learned a lot, and yeah, we'd love to have you back. Thanks for all you do. And over in OT world.
You guys as well.
Keep my lights on, please.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
My wife likes the heat in the winter and the cool in the summer. So you can keep that going. That'd be great. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining. For the first time ever, everyone gets to experience our outro music. Are you ready?
Okay.